Hey everybody, thank you for showing up for our session. It's about the future of feedback, and what we're hoping to do here is share some research that we've been doing looking at different ways surveys can be done. When you think about what our business is, in its essence, basically we ask questions, we get answers, so we communicate. And it's important that we move on and be current with the way people are communicating. And the way that people are communicating is changing and keeps changing faster and faster. There we go. So the way we interact keeps evolving, right? It keeps changing. It really wasn't that long ago, a few hundred years, that we used log drums and smoke signals to send messages over distance. And then things came along like Morse code. And suddenly we had telegraphs and messages could be transmitted across the country. It was amazing. And then we had the crazy thing called a fax machine. You know, I remember when that came in, that's how old I am. And it was, revolutionary. The way we keep communicating keeps changing, and technology keeps accelerating and faster. So the changes that we have now are greater and greater and coming at us more rapidly. And I think that has huge implications for our business. The fact that we are still today talking about adapting for mobile is kind of ridiculous, really. The world is mobile. Half you guys are looking at your phones right now, right? I mean, we are using these tools all the time, and yet right now only about 30% of surveys that get done are on a mobile device. Why? In part because we've trained people to think, oh my God, if I do it on a mobile device, it's going to be a crappy experience. They're going to give me one of those stupid grids, and it's going to take me forever, and I'm going to hate it. So I think use would be much, much higher if we allowed it, if we kept up. We've taken a long time. It's a conservative industry. We've taken a long time to change from in-person to telephone, from telephone to the World Wide Web, to mobile, but we really need to look further ahead. And in the spirit of SampleCon, we want to share some of the looking ahead that we've done. I should mention, my name's Andrew Grenville. I'm the Chief Research Officer with Meru Matchbox. This is my colleague, Rob Berger, who is one of the board members here, so probably
apparently, they almost forgot this morning.
Yeah. So, as an industry, I want to encourage all of us to think further ahead, and that's why we're doing this research, and that's why we want to share it with everyone. So we have to ask ourselves, what are we missing? What's happening if we don't stay on top of what's the trends that are out there? Technology continues to change, and mobile we have to adapt to. But there's so much more that we really need to consider. And there was a paper at the ESOMAR Big Data Conference in Brooklyn back in November that I saw that really struck me. And it was about public health research in Brazil, and it was around the Zika virus. They did some really, I thought, fascinating work where they surveyed hundreds of thousands, actually over 1 million people, and they asked them, is there standing water nearby? Are there people living nearby? And can you take a picture of the standing water? And from that, they were able to generate maps that helped them to go out and eradicate the standing water so that they could stop creating breeding grounds for these mosquitoes that were carrying the Zika virus. Huge challenge, something you've got to do right. Something you can't miss half the population because you didn't connect with them the way that you want to connect. So they did surveys, a noble use of our business. And they contacted 300,000 people through email, which is amazing. But they also connected with 400,000 people through text invites. Now, if they hadn't gotten to text invites, because that's not the way we do things, we do it by email. If they hadn't gotten to those text invites, they would have missed those 400,000 people, which meant that the granularity of their data would have been much worse, and they wouldn't have been as successful in eradicating that virus. But what's more important is that they contacted 750,000 people through WhatsApp. Because in Brazil, WhatsApp is very popular. And with that, they were able to get more people than they got through both email and text invites combined, thereby increasing the granularity of their data, thereby finding where they can go and see that pond, where they can drain it and make sure that the mosquitoes aren't breeding. So it's a huge impact, and imagine if they hadn't kept up with the way people communicate. It would have been a very different story, and there would probably still be more Zika virus out there. So we need to think about the way people are communicating now. So WhatsApp isn't necessarily big here, but it may become. So what about things like text invites? What about single panel apps? What about chatbots? And so forth. So what we want to do is share with you today some of the research we've done in this space. So the world of virtual assistants is really taking off. There was about, in our sample, which was done before Christmas, so maybe different after, there was about 20% of the population had a speaker that you could talk to. So Alexa or Google Home or something like that. But when you take into account also the smartphones with virtual assistants, half the people at least were aware that they had a virtual assistant on their smartphone. But not everybody used it. Not everybody wants to talk to Siri. So about 40% have used it. And then we asked them, would you try surveys on it? Would you like to do that? And then we get a quarter of the population saying, yeah, I would do that. But that, of course, is going to require us to change how we ask our questions and how we write our questionnaires. But I don't think we can afford to ignore that, especially when the technology really isn't mature yet. It's just in a very nascent stage, and that's huge. It's a generational story, and all of the data that Rob and I are going to share with you today, you can picture that if we show you 25%, that if we talk about millennials and younger, that the numbers are very much higher. So we don't show that data over and over and over again, but I will show you just this one example now, and you can know that the pattern repeats throughout. So if we look among millennials, those up to 35, 3/4 have a virtual assistant, just over half have used it, and 40% would try surveys on it. So there's definitely interest there, and so we need to think about, okay, if one section of the population is really into this kind of device, we better be ready to cater for that. Yes, and then voice to text. So on your phones and your smartphones, they'll have a little microphone feature. And so we asked people while they were doing the survey, which was a text-based survey to begin with, not SMS text, but you're answering, you're ticking boxes and so forth. We got to an open end and we said, hey, we'd really love it if you could try it as a voice to text. Because we're interested in, will people like that? Is that the way we should go with an open end? And will we get richer data? Will we get more data? Will we get a better, richer, conversational type of situation? And we've tried this a few times over the years just to track whether things are changing because people are getting more voice-driven. Where we're at now is when we ask people to do it, so they're in the survey, all they have to do is click the microphone button. About half were able to figure it out. And then we ask them, what would you prefer? Would you prefer what you just did, which is speak about it, speak to the phone and answer your question that way, or would you rather type? So since we were embedded in a survey that was all about clicking and typing anyway, we get more people who say, you know what, I was in that groove, it was kind of awkward to switch out, and I'd rather keep typing. We're going to keep monitoring this. I think we'll see this change as people get more used to virtual assistants and more used to talking to devices. But right now, that's the situation, not a big winner. I see some people are taking pictures of these. Absolutely. We want to share these data everywhere. I will, at the end, show you a white paper that we've got that you guys are all free to download from the Mara Matchbox resource site. And now I will turn things over to Rob.
All right, thank you. Other areas we looked at and techniques, first one was open-ended videos. I think many of you are familiar with the different tools in the market that are using those, and it's a really great addition to research exercises. You know, there's nothing like bringing the respondent into the boardroom with you, with the CEO of your client, showing them what they look like. However, as one of the themes as Andrew has already been bringing across, is that each of these techniques create certain types of audiences. Like my wife, for example, would never do a video open-end. I can barely get her to be in a picture on a family trip. No, that looks terrible. I don't want to be in that picture. So imagine my wife is now out of the equation entirely for this type of technique. So we did ask people, would they be willing to do the video? And not surprisingly, there are many people like my wife who don't, and it was only 22% who did. And then even of those, there's a percentage of people who can even do the video. Either they can figure it out, they know how to use the technology, most computers have webcams, they may not even realize it's there. It's surprising. So our conclusion is, it's a great tool, use it wisely. It's not representative of the population. App Center, let me get the little clicker here. All right. The other thing we looked at was app-centered communities. So their apps are really popular. They're everywhere. But it's really hard to be an app. It's if you get noticed, you might be fun and popular for a couple of months, and then you disappear. On average, data shows, according to Nielsen, that most people only have an average of 27 apps on their phone. So there's millions of apps. Most people have 27 or less. So you're really in a crowded space you're trying to break into. So we went out to our Springboard America community, to an audience of people who are investors, and we posed to them the theory that we'd like to build an investor community. And we asked them, when they join that community, would they download an app? So, we asked them first, would they join the community? So of the 350 people who were investors, 21% said they would join a community. Great, not that unusual. However, if there was an app required to join that community, meaning you joined the community, but the only way was through an app, or you had to have an app in order to communicate with the community, it dropped to only 14%, which was really interesting. But where it really gets interesting is only 5% who would join and use the app. So you can see again, there is, while this is another really important new technology that we can be using to engage with respondents and gather surveys, it does very quickly diminish the audience that you're going to get into your sample and into your community as a result.
I should also just jump in for a second and mention that the people that did agree were very different than the original sample. So they tended to be younger, more technology oriented, and actually had, I think, less net worth. So the group that you end up with is not the group that you desire. So it has a very rate limiting effect, and it really is essentially a community killer.
Perfect. Another area we looked at, which Andrew actually talked a little bit about earlier in the Zika example, the surveys, is text invites. Getting surveys through your mobile phone via text. And, I'm not as old as Andrew. No, he's actually just a year older than me. We took a look at it because particularly amongst teens, and I'm getting older, and I have an almost 12-year-old who now has his own phone, and he rarely communicates with me via email. I think if it's an email, it's because it's something that somebody else sent to him, most likely his grandparents who are still using email, that he wants me to look at, but it's almost entirely text, WhatsApp, Instagram, through those types of channels. So, as we were talking about earlier, generational differences, millennials are very much more interested. So if you're looking at some of the data here, and we actually broke this up by Canada and the US, we've done this presentation in Canada as well. It's actually in the US where you can see that there is a much greater desire to receive surveys by text, which actually I find interesting being Canadian, because Canadians are pretty high adopters of new technology. But in the US, there is a desire, and without using it, you are again limiting your audiences just using the email or other methods. So we want to call it out, and it's just something that we have to be aware of as we're going, and it's an essential option that we have to give to community members and survey takers. So the other area is artificial intelligence. Everyone's talking about all these different ways to engage with respondents. I've had conversations with a variety of folks the last 2 days where they're talking about using behavioral data, DMPs, et cetera, to actually target people through behavior they're exhibiting on the web, rather than the traditional pre-screening we all do, or as we were talking about in I think the last presentation, all the disqualifications, we have no idea who you are, but we can maybe use this third-party data in order to deliver a survey to you that is more likely of interest and something you would qualify for. So, search engines like Google, they're using, this type of technology to follow you around, figure out what they should feed to you. It's the same concept. So we asked people, one idea is, would you install software in your computer in any mobile device, just like Google? So we asked our respondents that would allow you to try, get targeted surveys, things you like, things you qualify, et cetera. So if you look at the result, some of the data that came through, people did like the idea, particularly again in the US. Almost 3/4 of the population really liked the idea that they would get a survey that based on this technology. However, when you start asking them to install passive tracking, it does drop quite a bit. Again, now creating a very different audience. People who want to be followed. It's like a little bit similar to the people who want to be on camera. These are different people. They act differently and they respond differently. And I'm not saying you shouldn't use these tools. These tools are fantastic. You just have to be aware and know that you need to calibrate your data and your outcomes to account for that. So these are some comments from actually our panelists on Springboard America. One said, it would waste less time for me, and as I wouldn't have to answer a series of questions, only be rejected for not qualifying. As we've heard, the 8.5 out of 10, 9 out of 10 phenomenon, damn the DQ, that Mendy was talking about before. This could be a solution, again, if people would allow you to do it. Another person said, sounds good, I'm being tracked anyways, so you might as well send me something interesting. This is somebody who's just like, yeah, whatever, Big Brother's watching me, I don't care, use it to my advantage. However, there were people who were definitely disliked it. Some people said it was creepy, intrusive, repulsive, hence my comment about Big Brother is here, and I'm encouraging him to take over. He knows everything about me, this is horrible. And lastly, we had to wordsmith this one because it was a little inappropriate, but the person was saying this thought. They detest the intrusive nature of Google at all. I do not care to see it carried on to other companies. So they were really not interested in the idea that research companies would copy and bring that sort of technique into the survey world. I think this is where I hand it back over to Andrew.
And I should just mention that the passive monitoring thing is deeply divisive. So the people had very strongly felt opinions on either side of it, and the people that were against it were very, very much against it, and as Rob mentioned earlier, very different. So know that the people who agree are going to differ in quite significant ways from everyone. Thanks, Rob.
All right.
So AI-powered qualitative. So chatbots, essentially. So we said to respondents, artificial intelligence is becoming part of many aspects of society and business. We're interested in your thoughts on its possible role in surveys like this. We went on. Advances in artificial intelligence will soon make it possible for there to be a virtual interviewer who asks questions based on your answers. For example, it might ask you, what's your favorite fruit? And if you answer bananas, the virtual interviewer might follow up by asking, what is it about bananas that you like? And if you answer, I like the bananas have a lot of potassium, it might ladder on and say, what is it that you like about potassium? So then we asked, if a virtual interviewer could be part of a survey like this, would that be something you like or something you dislike? And would you prefer that it ask you the questions out loud, or would you rather them send you essentially a message? And so we see that about half say they would like this idea, a little higher in the US than in Canada. And interestingly, back to the voice versus text thing, most people said they would prefer a text over a virtual voice reading things out to them. Again, that may be different as people get used to Siri in the home or the other Amazon ones.
Those are mine.
Yeah. So we think it's pretty inevitable that change is coming, and change is coming at us really quickly. And we need to be thinking about how we are going to adapt and change the way we ask questions, change the way we do surveys, adapt to the reality that if we keep soldiering on with a methodology that's driven only by desktops and mobile devices, then we're going to start missing people. So think about that Zika situation and the public health work that was done in Brazil. Only possible to be as good as they were because they use multiple modalities. The reality is the future will be fragmented. People will be answering our surveys through different ways. And we need to find and do a lot of careful research to make sure that the answer that we're getting over a virtual assistant is the same as we're getting if we had someone do it on a mobile device. But this will have a lot of implications. So think about what that means for scales. Big, long, wordy scales, multi-point scales. Is that going to work over Alexa? Well, she reads out, you know, would you strongly agree, or an 11-point scale and they enumerate all the points in the scale? Probably not, right? It's not going to work. Grids. This has got to be the death of grids. It'll be great to say goodbye to the grids, but it's a reality. So we're going to have to rethink what we do and be very careful to make sure that we're collecting the right data and the same data, equivalent data, from everywhere. And that's going to mean giving up a lot of our favorite things that we've done and our habits that we've had forever. So tracking studies that have been going on since, showing that same dead thing, dead unchanging line forever. I mean, it's time to say goodbye to those two, because frankly, what are they telling anyone? And they're just giving the insight industry really a bad reputation because they're data, but they're useless data. So the future is going to be very fragmented, and that means we need to rethink our platforms and how we ask our questions, which is going to be an uncomfortable change because nobody really likes to switch things up that much. It's a bit of a challenge.
Definitely not in market research.
Not in market. Market research is obviously a very conservative industry, but we really risk extinction if we don't move with the times. So we're going to have to change or die. So the future has to be, from our point of view, device agnostic design. And that's going to be, again, a trick. And people haven't worked that out. And we don't have, I'm not aware, if somebody is, please tell me, aware of good tools and good research that's been done to look at how a virtual assistant affects data, or a good survey engine that will cope with that. So given the history of the market research industry and its warm embrace of mobile over a very, very long, slow period of time, it would be possible for us to just drag our feet. But really, we'd just be, in the end, losing out to all the better quality data that's out there. Because as soon as our answers that come back from our surveys are not helping make an intelligent decision, like if they're actually giving you the wrong data, well then that's it, we're done, we're over. They should usher us out, and they should close down the insights division and sweep us aside. So this is critical that we really get this right. We don't have an opportunity to just drag our feet. We must move forward. We're like this guy on the cliff here. You know, we don't really have an option to go back down. We've got to go up. We've got to surmount this, and we must move forward. So a question I want to put to you is, you know, what will we do? What can we do in the spirit of SampleCon as a group to embrace this? How can we work together? Because no one company is going to figure this out on its own in isolation and be the only one that comes out as the winner. It's going to be like the discussion that was earlier, that if we everybody does their own little thing, their own platform, their own specific thing, and tries to take over the world, well, then we're not going to pull nearly as far or as fast as we could if we worked together. So we'll open things up to questions, and I will mention that this white paper, which has all these data in it, except for the targeted survey stuff, is available at our resources page. But curious about questions, people's perspectives.
Yeah, we still have about 12 minutes.
Yeah, now we can all break for lunch now if you want, but yeah.
Hopefully my voice carries, but if it doesn't, just let me know. I know that there are companies in the space that are working on things like they're working on ways to use survey metadata in online and mobile-based surveys to essentially extract the questionnaire and then turn it into a more friendly format. I don't know how to do that with matrix-style questions. I don't know if the methodology person at compliance is freaking out about that and saying, don't touch my survey. But the idea makes a lot of sense, especially when you think about, I mean, all the examples that you've listed, like voice-to-text translation has never really been thought of before. All the mobile capabilities like swiping, drawing, using your finger are other things that people have not considered. But I like the thought of opening up companies to partner with other companies that create the questionnaires to try using things. There really aren't that many companies to create a solid questionnaire, at least from a major company standpoint. So I think fostering that within this industry, as someone that has absolutely no affiliation with those companies whatsoever, to know what it takes to do that sounds nice, and I'm curious to see if that is a possibility. Why?
I'd love to say on this. So I'm Cal, I'm still product owner there. I completely agree with you. I think the point that we got, the place we are as a company, we built about 4 years ago, we built our own data collection tool, which we found at the time we went to market. We were trying to get this idea off the ground, which was to automate kind of big ticket, blue chip star market research, not the survey monkey stuff. But there wasn't anything that you could create the questions that you could replicate the methodology with, basically. So we've got all this old market research IP sitting within this tool that enables us to ask questions and generate normative scores. All this stuff's still very significant to our funds. The frustrating thing about that is like you said, great questions. I'm currently working on a sampling, working on expanding our sampling capabilities at the moment. Typing tools is the thing that's just reared its head for me. That as something I want to try and fit on a strategic roadmap of things to build is a nightmare because it's always client specific and it's always grid question based.
Yeah.
It's got, I mean, these things don't fit well into the, they don't fit well into an attempt to try and make stuff mobile friendly. So I guess what I'm getting to is when we've seen it with a couple of clients who kind of meekly come forward and say, oh, we actually have this 7-question one instead of the 25-question typing tool we can use and stuff like that. Is this really about behavioral change within the buyers of research? I mean, again, I don't want to blame, somebody said it earlier, don't blame your clients or anything. But,
Yeah, we never want to blame the researchers.
I guess I'm faced with a lot of things that's very challenging to make programmatized because they are so varied or they're so numerous and the number of question answer options and so on.
I think it's a super huge challenge. And I mean, I think if you look at your situation where you've got normative data, right, and you're going to change the questions, and that means the norms have to say goodbye. I mean, they can live on as information that when it inform, and you can probably find correlations between those norms and the new measures, but that means, yeah, the challenge is going to be huge around behavioral change that you're going to have to kiss goodbye an asset, and they're going to be loath to part with that and the IP that goes with it. But the reality is if you cling to it, it's just going to become misleading, and that's going to be worse. That's where the industry shoots itself in the foot.
Yeah, I agree. I think like Andrew's done some research, and you can talk a little more to him. I can talk on your behalf around, moving from grids down to like just single like or dislike, hot or not, cool or bad. I'm just making up some of these. And how do those work? Sorry. Swiping left and right, exactly. But how does that work with, you're talking about a typing tool or creating a segmentation, and if you wanted to run that through Alexa, You know, to find an audience of that, you know, those 40% of millennials, how would that work? Trying to, yeah, are you da 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 da? The speaker probably, and they're pretty cheap actually. The speakers might actually break by the time you run through all of the iterations and the tools. So, you know, research would have to be done around, you know, how do you adapt those type of tools into these more simplistic, but also generate very reliable results, which Andrew has done testing on. So I thought I'd just bring that up.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Speaking of the resource center here, we've done a bunch of work, and the super short answer is it's surprisingly easy to convert a lot of scales into binary stuff and get largely the same data, get the same pattern, come to the same decisions. But it's detailed, and I think there's about 3 white papers on that idea that you could take a look at. But I think that's the good news: is change is possible, and it's not as if we're going to get totally different things. But sorry, yeah, you guys.
Yeah, just changing the behavior is more the challenge.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's super cool that you guys are doing this research on research, and particularly identifying the biases in the, you know, based on the distribution method. And 2 quick sort of thoughts or questions that came up for me during this. One was that like there seems to be this theme around like some of the verbal, or like you're actually talking or it's speaking to you, not necessarily being as appealing. And it feels like some foundational thing around like the actual behaviors and constraints when someone is using their phone to take surveys would be really helpful around that. Like if they're
Yeah.
mostly doing it in class or on the subway or something like that,
Oh,
it's
yeah.
like obvious that you don't want
Okay.
like recording a video of yourself answering a survey question. So that seems like something that could help explain or get in front of some of these
Right.
things. And then the other sort of question was basically like if you guys have done similar work on the more traditional methods, because there are other biases that get introduced by virtue of the fact that someone has signed up for a rewards panel or whatever. And so I would just be curious if you know like the flip side of what biases are introduced there.
You want to answer? We've done tons in the second.
Yeah.
You can start if you like. Yeah, your second question, we've done a lot of research around.
Yeah, so we've done a lot of work on sample quality and sample source.
Yeah.
And I think maybe if you just think back to the app example, it's as good an example as any. The way how you recruit, who you recruit, what constraints you put upon them, the expectations that are there, what are the motivations, why are they responding? Those are all crucial things that totally, absolutely add tons of bias, and you could have the most cool questionnaire in the world, and if you've got the wrong sample, you're hooped. But this is
Yeah,
a sample
I just
conference, so I'm not going to preach to the converted for sure.
Yeah, I just wrote a blog around this topic, and if you go to on the website, it'll click into a number of those white papers around, again, issues around, like, let's say loyalty cards. You know, if you know, and I've had live issues where a client came to me and said, "Oh, I want to do a grocery study, and I'm going to use this panel source." And in this example, I actually said, "Well, that wouldn't be a good idea, because if your client was this X, then that could create bias, because that source from this loyalty community, which is being used by that grocer." And the client goes, "Oh, how did you know my client?" And I was like, "Oh," and it was a complete lucky guess. And immediately they didn't use that. They switched the way they were doing the sampling, because there's when we have a whole lot of research that shows that is a major driver. And that's just one example, loyalty. There's a number of different methodological issues around sample source and how people are recruited.
Yeah.
In the more traditional sense, not necessarily these new technologies.
And big differences too. Like even when the
Yeah.
sample source was a loyalty card and not everybody was from that, even then we've seen situations where out of multiple panels, you would get, say, 20-ish% of the people that are shopping at that store, but from this other source, it's 45%. And so that's the kind of magnitude of difference we've seen with that kind of bias.
Yeah.
So for sure, it's a big
issue.
consideration.
Yeah.
So, sorry, he's been you've been patiently waiting.
Then we get to Lisa.
Jasinski with Cox Communications. I've only been, this is my first visit to SampleCon. It's now been 2 hours, 3 hours of visit. And so my observation is that, you know, I'm sure I'll hear more. And I know some of these challenges, and I'm aware of many of these challenges, but these things that you talk about are not going to change in isolation. I mean, this whole ecosystem, and I'm surprised, again, based on 3 hours of visit here, that this event isn't more broad in terms of encompassing the corporate perspective, the market research company vendor
Yeah, no, I think you're bang on, and I do think that the MR world and then the world within that little subword of sample can be pretty insular. And I do believe that you're right, that this is going to be something that happens system-wide, right? So it's not just us, it's customer service is going to have to be dealing with people wanting to connect with them through multiple modes. So it's going to be part of a change. I just think from a market research point of view, we've got to be like surfing the crest of that wave as opposed to trying to paddle to catch up while the wave's gone past us. Sorry, you wanted to...
Totally agree.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it's so challenging. I lay up at night thinking about this stuff because, you know, a lot of times our goals on one end of the ecosystem are conflict with our clients' goals. You know what I mean? And that just is crazy to me. But there's a lot of, I think, coalitions and consortiums that have surfaced through the years, some more effective than others. And I plan to talk about this tomorrow during my
Right.
presentation because I think that's where you start, is having that open dialogue that's representative of multiple verticals within the space, sort of all talking about what they're willing to give up and what's important for sort of the greater good. But a lot of times these coalitions kind of come in with, you know, we're all sort of carrying our own agenda. You got to leave that at the door, you know. But I did have a question. I mean, I don't know if you guys covered it. I was a little bit late. I'm sorry. I was
No
probably
worries.
late. Have you guys done research on browser notifications as a means to engage respondents?
No, that's a good idea.
So, another good one.
Like,
Yeah.
curious about that.
No,
And in
yeah.
fact, anybody who's got any ideas for other stuff that we should ask about,
Yeah.
tell us and we'll make sure we get the info
If
back to
you
you.
also spend, like, a lot of time online, but you're not necessarily logging into a panel website, so the idea would be to have those notifications.
Push to you.
Yeah, there's a survey available, or yeah.
I think that's going to be a really important means of engagement.
Yeah, and there's some interesting. We've done some research on that. We were on chatbots, and that's sort of, you know, on your phone where you get the notification through Messenger. And there's some companies that are coming into that space where, again, you're doing it right in Messenger, Facebook Messenger, and yeah, we haven't actually done it within browser
Yeah,
specifically.
I built a mobile panel way back when we were first starting to say this is the year of mobile.
Yeah.
It's like 2011. Still hold my breath.
Every year. Yeah.
You know, what you said definitely resonated with me. It was such a pain to get people to stay into the app.
Yeah.
No matter how much money
Yeah.
I threw at the problem,
Yeah.
retention was the biggest issue. And, you know, notifications was like our only saving grace to get people
Right.
to come and
Yeah.
engage.
Right.
Yeah, 95% of apps are deleted within 3 months.
Yeah.
Just,
The mobile browser is the way to go, I think.
yeah, we'll try that.
Yeah.
Giving up on apps.
Yeah, we'll try that. Have that.
Sorry.
Question. Oh, over here, Sarah.
We run notifications both on apps and in the browser. And you've got to be very careful about how often and when. Because if you spoof people or they feel they're being spoofed, they get very, very unhappy and can go immediately. But if you pitch it at the right level, we get response times, you know, within 90 seconds we get people coming in and executing, going into the survey. So it's incredibly powerful.
Have you guys developed like a SOP, like this is the frequency by which we should engage people, or is it user level? Or?
We have different profiles of users, so it depends really on their activity. But it is it's a delicate thing. You have to dial it up and down and be very careful about how often you
Yeah.
spam people.
Yeah.
Right. Just another way. It could be another way of just sending mass emails. Except now it's on their screen and it's just super annoying because if their email, they have to go to it with that. It's just, it's like.
The other issue we have is that in this ecosystem, we're a apparel supplier. We don't always know the server's actually going to be there when they land.
Right.
So it's actually a much harder problem than we would think. But I'm not sure we do it, but it's clearly not perfect.
I just came across some research by Pew the other day, which looked at email invites versus email plus text and notification and with a reminder to do the survey. And the interesting thing that came out of that was that in the end, the response rate was exactly the same. But what was different was, to your point about people acting quickly, is that they've got more people sooner. Now, Pew are those dogged, persistent people that, you know, they'll do notifications for up to 15 days. They don't send them every day, but that was the interesting part. So they got a better response rate in the first few days, and but in the end, it was exactly the same. Anyway, I see we've run out of time, so
we're out of
thank you
time.
for your time and attention. And like we said, if you've got ideas about stuff to test, We'd love to hear them. And if you just want to talk about it, we're around. Okay, so thank you very much.
Thank you.